Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today I'm just taking a little break out of making the new episode of the Weekly Reset. In fact, Evitel, she's not allowed out of that room next door. I've got her chained to the desk, she's writing, she's creating images, we're making a fantastic episode just for you. But in the meantime, I thought today we would present to you, finally, our developer interview from Blizzcon 2018. Because apart from everything else we did at BlizzCon, we were lucky enough to sit down with Kevin Martens, a lead game designer for WoW, and Frank Kowalkowski, who is an assistant technical director, and talk to them about WoW stuff. And before we play this interview for you, I want to give you a little heads up on a couple of things. Firstly, the timing of this interview. This interview was scheduled to take place between the opening ceremony and the WoW What's Next panel. So what that meant was we had to ask them questions based on stuff we didn't know anything about. So rather than even try and do that, which would have been absolutely stupid, we chose to talk to them more about their process and the creative decisions that go into making the game, how far in advance those decisions are made, and we got some really interesting answers out of them. Number two, funny little story. We were in such a rush getting back to the hotel after the opening ceremony to pick up all of our gear and get back in time for this interview that we forgot quite an important piece of kit. We left this camera that I'm recording this piece to you now in our hotel room. We didn't have it, and we didn't realize that until we were getting everything ready for the interview with Kevin and Frank sitting there in front of us, judging us for our absolutely shoddy, unprofessional display, and rightfully so. Luckily though, Evitel just bought a new phone, and the camera on that phone was excellent. So we used that instead, and it's absolutely fine. Not as good as this camera would have been, obviously. And for the interview bits, we shrunk the screen size down to 720 resolution as well, so it doesn't look all stretched and terrible. But that's why we've done that. Luckily, we remembered all of our sound equipment. So the sound is absolutely great when it's Kevin and Frank talking, because for some reason, they know how to talk into a microphone, and for some reason, I don't. So when I'm asking the questions, I spoke far too loudly and far too closely to the microphone, so it peaks really badly. I had to turn the volume down a bit for that, but it's only me that happens with. Don't you worry. Another thing, which I almost cut out of the interview actually, was the second question we asked about Azerite armor, because the question was supposed to be about how when something goes wrong, like Azerite armor, and it needs all this attention to try and fix it, and all these alterations sort of halfway through an expansion, the question was really like, how does that affect your planned sort of rollout for the expansion? How does that impact the other work that you were planning to do if you weren't planning on having to fix Azerite armor? And Kevin Martens talks about Azerite armor, but doesn't really answer that question. And I don't think it's his fault. I think I just didn't ask the question very well. And I was this close to cutting that question and answer out of this entire video, but he actually does say some really interesting things. From that point onwards, I think the interview gets into its stride, and I think it's just a really nice chat. I always enjoy just listening to people who make World of Warcraft talk about them making World of Warcraft, and there are some super interesting little tidbits that crop up as well. So I'm going to be back after the interview to talk through a couple of those with you at the end as well. But for now, Internet, sit back, relax, and enjoy our developer interview with Kevin Martens and Frank Kowalkowski at BlizzCon 2018. Okay? Go.
So my name is Kevin Martens. I am a lead game designer on World of Warcraft. In Battle for Azeroth, I worked on the Horde continent and world quests, and I do user interface and a bunch of other stuff.
My name is Frank Kowalkowski. I'm the assistant technical director on World of Warcraft. A lot of what I do is helping artists and engineers get their job done, help develop the game world, and attend a lot of meetings.
We have lots of questions we want to ask you about BFA, but I'm really intrigued by your talk about working on the technical side. There's a big technical change coming with regards to how it runs on cores and processes, and talking to an idiot like me, could you explain what kind of difference that's going to make on people's sort of gameplay experience?
So when Battle for Azeroth shipped, we removed DirectX 9 as one of our backend graphics APIs. We replaced it with DirectX 12. It's a little bit more modern. It's designed to be a little more lightweight and, burden the CPU a little less, trying to get information out to your high-speed graphics cards. So when we did that, a lot of players saw a little bit of an increase in performance, but by switching to DirectX 12, we actually opened up the possibility of multi-threading our renderer. And so that's what we're actually doing when Tides of Vengeance hits. We've done a lot of work on the engine side to put a lot of our rendering pipeline onto multiple threads. So we're going to use more of your CPUs, and it's going to make the game run all the happy with the results on the game client.
Thank you, because I recently decided not to buy like a 9-core processor and went for a 6 because I was told that would run WoW better, and it sounds like that's old news, and I wasted my money. So thanks, that's great. With regards to BFA and what you've been working on, which we're going to start with Azerite and how maybe the role of Azerite and the way it's implemented the game has kind of changed
and will be changing more going into Tides of Vengeance in a way that maybe as designers and developers you didn't expect, and it's work that you've kind of done on the fly on it. How does that impact your overall through line, your plans for how an expansion pans out if you have to like suddenly rework something?
Okay, so for Azerite, I think it's an example in a long list of unexpected results from things, and it happens every expansion. There's always something, usually more than one thing, where your best laid plans meet the road, and whatever, you have to change, make major changes to things. We're always curious what's going to happen. Like, we'd put a Warfront out, right? The first time we've ever done that. Who knows? Are people going to even like it, let alone play it? And did we do the right thing? Rewards in particular are constantly an issue for tuning. For any game with a long tail, like I used to work on Diablo 3, the bulk of the changes you make are around rewards, whether it's how classes are balanced or how the rewards flow or the cadence of them or the quality of them, or even if the numbers are the same, the feel of them. So Azerite's a great example of that, and we are making quite a few changes to it. So it's certainly one of the systems is in transition. New Azerite that comes out in Tides of Vengeance is going to have a 5th ring with all spec-based things. For Demon Hunters, for example, is I-Beam does basically just more damage, and when you use Metamorphosis, it instantly refreshes I-Beam and Blades of Fury, etc. So there's a lot of changes on the traits. The armor itself is getting a little more intention to it, so when you are searching for pieces that you haven't found yet, we have a whole currency system going in. You get it from Mythic Plus, you get it from breaking down Azerite armor, and you can use that to buy specific pieces or save it up to buy even better ones. And more changes than that. Plus, it changes every day on PTR as we keep tuning it. So by Monday, I may be out of date in what I'm telling you. So we'll see.
The rise of Zakan and Zappy Boi. The community absolutely adores Zakan and has done since the opening cinematic for BFA that we saw this time last year. And the memes started in earnest, and then of course he reappeared in Old Soldier, and now, spoiler, there's more stuff with him in actual quests and missions in 8.1 as well. How much of that was always planned for him to be a character in the game, and how much of it was a reaction to community adoption of him as a kind of a character?
So, obviously he was always going to be a character in the game. He wouldn't have appeared in the cinematic with such a singular role if that wasn't the case. But yes, in fact, the role grew a little bit. He's appearing in more of Saurfang's storyline than he was originally intended to because of that. So, just like with you're always going to be tuning rewards, and you never stop tuning rewards, by the way. Certainly with characters, we're always surprised by at least one person that the community gloms onto, and I don't know why everyone loved him so much, and we couldn't recreate that if we wanted to. Often it's some cutesy pet or a specific mount or some minor NPC or the house full of cats in Borealis or whatever, but you can't predict it. The meme stuff is always super fun. And I, for example, love the memes where people Photoshop Ian into things. Now, I hope you guys aren't going to record this or film it or put it up on the internet, because I don't want to get in trouble, but...
It's probably worth saying as well now that if Zakan does anything less than become War Chief of the Horde, if God forbid he dies at any point, then we're coming back and you've got more questions to answer, and they're not nice questions like this. It's really interesting to hear that you worked on Zandalar, the Horde zone in that, Dazar'alor. Was that designed as a city with the raid in mind, or was that something that you came back to having seen how well it would kind of fit that?
Dazar'alor was planned as a city that would become a raid in a future patch.
Get a flight path down to the ships. This is your fault.
I
hate you, you're a horrible man.
I don't know that the flight paths had anything to do with that, but yes, it was always intended that there would be an assault on Dazar'alor at some point.
And further that as well, was it always from the kind of inception of it as a raid going to be a Horde Alliance sort of split raid?
Yeah, that was made extremely early on. We knew we wanted to have a separate experience for the Horde and Alliance in a raid, and Dazar'alor made a lot of sense as the focal point of where the story was taking us. So yes, it was always designed to be Horde kind of starting in one spot, having their own journey through an Alliance, doing their thing.
Did you decide that was going to be a raid, and so therefore we need an alliance attack on Dazar'alor, therefore we need to get the story there. And so did you kind of work backwards from that point to make the story fit into the raid, or was it the other way around?
The raid and having it be both directions was in there early on. Sometimes we play with timing, like sometimes we have plans for things. They might come a little bit later or a little bit earlier, and we don't know like which content update they'll be in, depending on how other things go. In this particular case, this was when we wanted to do it, and evidently the Alliance had some brush fire or something, and so we felt like they needed some sort of symbolic response to that, right? Not just the Warfront, but the Alliance needed to have a chance to do something meaningful to the Horde as well. And of course, if you've played the expansion without specific spoilers, Zandalar is a pretty rickety kingdom right now. It's this great old empire, but it's sort of rotten from the inside, and there's major power groups who are trying to undercut things, and Talanji's on top of it, but the king is not, and so it's a great time to sort of launch an attack when they've been weakened by the blood trolls and the blood god and all sorts of other things.
That's a really interesting point that you just brought up, with your very cruel and heartless mentioning of the burning of Teldrassil. Is there a sense amongst the team, because I know there is in the community, that you have to kind of balance the things that happen to each faction? So is the Battle of Dazar'alor a direct sort of attempt from the devs to sort of balance the bad things that happen to one faction over another?
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I'm not actually joking about the thing, even though I literally joked about it. Yes, if you're going to have a war between the factions, I mean, there's always a Cold War between the factions, and obviously it was put aside because of more existential threats in Legion for quite some time. Now that that's been dealt with and them getting back at each other's throats, we felt like that was a really good time to do that, and we wanted them to have very big moments and make meaningful changes to the world, have the characters make meaningful changes in their own arcs. In some cases, they pass away. In some cases, their lives change. Like, we wanted things to mean something. We wanted the attacks to mean something. We wanted this to be big and something that people talk about. And so the particular ideas, there's like a million of them out there of where we could have gone. Some of these character arcs have been in the works for years, and we've always known where they're going to go. Like Jaina, details aside, this sort of direction for her is something that they've had in mind for a long time. In other cases, we make characters up just for the expansion. You know, like all of Rastakan's council, many of them have come to life only when the expansion happened. But all the major characters, we talk about them usually years in advance. And the big moments here, yeah, it was just, we wanted this battle to have impact. If we're going to name it that, and it's going to be a real red versus blue thing, it can't just be normal everyday questing and normal everyday raids. They have to have some symbolic value as well.
I really love how the 8.1 sort of war campaign stuff really sets up the different bosses for the different factions as well that they're going to face in the raid, which is something that you've been kind of doing since Hellfire, I guess, actually at the very end of WoD, and it's sort of like really, really good at the moment, the way that's happening as well. I think it's hilarious how gnome players have been waiting for many, many years for their race to basically do anything in the game, and in 8.1 there's some actually really awesome stuff that their leader Mechatork does, fighting with Gallywix and things like that. But it's only Horde players that get to see it. Do you ever think about sort of giving different races within factions sort of their time in the spotlight, or is it something that kind of happens much more naturally?
It is, to be fair, it is a mix of both of those things. Like, there is natural storylines and there's natural directions where you'd expect things to fall out, or that you have a twist in mind for things. But yeah, we want all the races to have, you know, something that happens within every expansion cycle. And I do feel, and many other gnome players do as well, I have a gnome monk, and I do feel like he sometimes feels a little lonely out there or forgotten, right? But yeah, Mechatork and having him have a bigger role, we've certainly had a lot of fun with that. In the raid, there's going to be a way that you can see the other side story as well, so you'll be able to experience that through these scouting report things. And so I believe, I don't know, I think that's playable on PTR right now. I haven't tried on PTR. It certainly works internally. So that is one method there. And expect more from gnomes in the future. We haven't forgotten them. Sometimes characters have to take a break. There's a lot of races and a lot of classes, and so we want to give everybody unique storylines, but sometimes we have to spread it out over time so that we can have like fewer, better, bigger moments. But yeah, I mean, we represent all races and backgrounds. People have been playing, whatever since the beginning or since every race first launched, and we have advocates on the team advocating for the races and classes that you guys love and play as well every day. Trust me, in my office every day somebody's here complaining about something, usually for good reason, and we'll do our best to fix that up.
One really interesting aspect technically about the new raid is that when you do that swap over that you were talking about and the Alliance play the Horde bosses and vice versa, at the moment, say if an Alliance player becomes a Horde player to fight the boss, they're gaining Horde racials as well. Is that something that is going to actually make it to the live patch, do you think, or is it something you're just playing with at the moment?
I think that's a we'll see. It makes a lot of sense, though, if you're going to play as a Horde, and that's kind of why we're exploring that territory, to actually experience it the same way that the Horde would have when they were fighting, Mekatork and all the way down. So we're gonna take it as far as we can, and if it makes sense, then we'll keep it there.
So assuming it's a massive success, and the player base loves it and it changes the game, are there other ways that you're thinking of changing the gameplay experience in sort of fundamental ways, like this raid? Because this changes like a core concept of World of Warcraft in a way, and it's messing with maybe the one most sacred sort of bastion of WoW gameplay in raiding.
I think that when we do things like this, in this case, it's actually probably more based on the needs of the story or where that is going when it becomes more appropriate. So some things are very like mechanical, and we want to do this thing or do this system, and that tends to be really much on the system end. Once content starts getting involved, it serves the needs of the story from a conceptual point of view right off the bat. Of course, the gameplay is the most important thing at the end of the day. Blizzard's first value is gameplay first, but ideas like this one came up not because it's something that we have to do a dual raid necessarily. The idea has been around forever as well. There's a lot of people on the team, so there's a lot of ideas hanging out there, more we can possibly ever make. But in this case, it felt right for this time. That's not to say it won't happen again or something similar. We won't try other experiments, but it depends, what's happening or what the setting is. That really matters a lot as well. Like the way that flight masters work in Argus in the last content update for Legion. We changed them to be teleporters because it just felt more right. Everything got really science fiction-y there for a minute, right? And we originally had flight masters, and we tried to change them because it felt right. And that wasn't like, we need to have more teleporter-based things. It's got to be Star Trek up in here. No, it was because that made sense with the setting.
Awesome, thank you. And we met some devs sort of out and about BlizzCon type things last night, and it was really interesting how each of them had an element of their job that they find most satisfying. So we spoke to some quest designers who are just really proud of characters that they've created, who have kind of taken off and been appreciated, like Roslyn, the wonderful Kultiran huntery person. She's awesome. And zone designers who were really proud of what they created and the zones that they've been involved in. For you guys personally, what's the most satisfying part of the process for you?
Watching it all come together. We worked a lot on the technology side, particularly in Legion, to try and do things like push out the draw distance, change the lighting model, change the fogging model in the game so that we could have these planes of fog over the water that you see in Nazmir right now. And then just watching all of that work kind of funnel down into the artists, and they use it and they kind of fumble around with it, and they're like, how would I ever use this new technology I just got? And they play around with it in Legion, and then their eyes start to light up and say, I could do something really cool, like put fog over the water in Nazmir and create these really cool and interesting effects. And then they begin to use it to tell stories. We push out the draw distance, and now you're standing on the edge of, like, say, Dalaran, and you're looking out and seeing all the story points in Legion, and you're doing that now at the top of the pyramid. You're looking out at Nazmir, at the harbor, and eventually these big events are going to be happening there. And kind of watching all of that come together is the most satisfying part of my job.
For me, as a lead, I don't get to make a lot of stuff. I make very little. I just did a handful of quests in this game, for example, as far as quest content. I used to make a lot more. I think that seeing other people, like the story you mentioned about meeting people and having them be proud, like we have this new quest designer. She's an experienced game developer, but she's only been on WoW or at Blizzard for a little while, and having her sit at the signing table this morning right after opening announcement, and someone saying that their favorite quest was one of hers, and I saw that happen. I was sitting right next to her and having her face light up, and she's always been a fan. Now she's on the other side of that table that is really satisfying to me, to see people like have their dreams come true as developers. And it is a special moment. And I love that part of the job.
We're recording this before the WoW What's Next panel, and assuming that anything you say is nothing to do with any kind of future content at all, if you could choose one zone to have a Warfront in, which one would it be?
Clearly, Drustvar needs a Warfront, obviously. And I think that the witches and wicker creatures need to come down on both sides constantly, and then maybe they win. And then you have to play a witch from now on. I think that'd be fun. For sure.
Drustvar is already gank central.
Yeah. No, having the monsters gank you as well. That's good.
I think the Volpera need their moment to be in a Warfront, so Vol'dun might be the right choice for us to finally take the fight to them.
What if the Volpera front is them looting as many bodies of Horde and Alliance soldiers as they can in the shortest amount of time, seeing as they're scavengers? Yeah? Yeah, okay.
Transitional gameplay.
All right.
In Son of the Wolf, the comic book that came out just before Legion, there's a future back, a glimpse into the future where Anduin, an old man Anduin, is getting ready to take on the final battle against the darkness. That's a very long time in the future, but is that a future that you know of? Do you know how this war will end?
It is a possible future. I actually know of a storyline that ends in that. We do have some crazy plans. Sometimes we'll sit there and talk about, hey, what'll happen like 400 years from now or something like that. And sometimes you get ideas out of that. Sometimes they happen now. Sometimes they sit in the misty future. I think that everyone should constantly ask Alex that question at the Q&A and see what he'll say. Yeah, because that's his for sure.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your time and your excellent answer.
So there we have it, and I hope you agree with me that there's some really interesting, useful things to come out of that. But the thing is though, I already know what half the comments already under this video will be. They're saying, Taliesin, why didn't you give them shit for Azerite armor? Why didn't you give them shit about class balance? Why couldn't you just drag them through the mud and make them answer these questions, you shill? To which I say, actually, that's not a bad question, but you have to remember the context of this interview. Like I say, it was 20 minutes before the WoW What's Next panel, so it would have been absolutely pointless us asking them anything about gameplay systems in that regard, because any questions like that, they would quite rightly just answer, well, you know, that's something that will probably get addressed in the WoW What's Next panel in about 20 minutes, which would have been a complete waste of our time, their time, and your time. So we had to make that decision of asking them more about the creative process and the decisions that had gone into making BFA as we know it. And also you got to think about who we were actually interviewing as well. Now those questions about Azerite armor and class balance would have been great questions for, say, Ion Hazzikostas if we'd interviewed him, but terrible questions for Alex Afraziabi, because that's just not what he deals with. And you've got to remember the roles that people play within the development of the game as well when you're asking questions like that. But with all that said, I feel like I got some really good insights into the creative process, and particularly with that last question. And Kevin Martens talking about the ending of that Son of the Wolf comic, which has been a hot topic for lots of sort of lore discussions in World of Warcraft since it came out. And when he said of old man Anduin sitting there with Velen in the Exodar and them getting ready for the final battle against the Shadow, for Kevin Martens to come out and say, yes, that is a future that I am aware of. It's a possible future. And just this idea that somewhere in the deepest, darkest depths of Blizzard's storytelling HQ, there's like a sacred whiteboard with all of these different storylines branching off into any number of different possible futures, and every time they make a choice somewhere along the line, it like scrubs out some of those potential futures until eventually you're just left with one, which is something I find incredibly exciting, the idea that they do think that far in advance. And in hindsight, that's something which is actually incredibly relevant to talk that we've all been having recently about Sylvanas and the Wrathgate. Because listen man, even I don't think that they planned Sylvanas to have ordered the Wrathgate 10 years ago, but then I hear developers say stuff like that about Son of the Wolf, and I suddenly think, you know, he's basically saying that actually they do plan these things that far in advance. An interesting point to dwell on. But anyway, I'll let you get on with your weekend while I go and make the weekly reset for your eyes, coming soon. Thank you for joining us today. If you liked this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons, because they give their actual real life money to make these videos happen. Oh, without the patrons, ain't no microphone that they're talking into in that interview, and also probably no videos because we wouldn't really make them. So thank you. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Kevin Kowalkowski. No, my name is Taliesin, from me and Evitel. Evitel! She says, "And from me." She's saying, "And from me." She's definitely not saying, "Please someone help me." That's not what she's saying. Until next time, cheerio.